Brad Johnson. So this whole deep state slash anti-state fake news slash propaganda thing is escalating, I think, beyond beyond the ability to easily grasp how deep and how intense and how dark this whole thing is. Now we've got this CEO from a high-tech company that seems to somehow connected to blockchain. Don't really remember much more than that. I think people in the high-tech world are very familiar with this guy, and I think extremely credible. I forget his name already, even though.
Patrick Byrne is the gentleman's name.
Yes, and highly credible people and well-reputable people, established people told him to come forward with his extraordinary story. And you know what? I'm reluctant to even say a word about what that story is because it's, you get one word wrong. I'm going to leave it to you because please just, if you can give us any insight on what this whole thing's about and what its implications are in terms of the extent to which intelligence organizations in the United States appear to have been subverted to a purpose completely other than constitutional.
Yeah, that's exactly right. It's such an interesting case, and there's so many aspects of this. I'm going to try to go through all of the things that really float to the top for me. Just first, in a nutshell, what has happened is Patrick Byrne, who was CEO of Overstock.com. Overstock.com, he was one of the founders of the company and was CEO for all of this time, I think 20 years, almost exactly to the day is when he's just resigned. He has said that he's resigned because he's going public on this, knew he was going to draw a lot of heat, a lot of fire, if you will, and so did not want that to impact his company, of which, of course, he's a major stockholder too. So it makes sense. He has separated himself so that whatever happens here doesn't impact Overstock.com. Now, he does have other interests, like you say, blockchain and Bitcoin and things like that. He's kind of into all of that world as well. So he's well known among the techie world, if you would like to say, the internet techies that are out there. So that's him. Now, I would just say a couple words about him as an individual. As you know, former CIA guy, operations, former chief of station, all that background. One of the things that we always look at and trained, and at least in the old days used to be trained to look at very carefully, is who precisely is the individual. And this Patrick Byrne has kind of an interesting way about him, an interesting mind, if you will. And I went through all of his interviews that he gave on television, which I think he made 4 major ones and has done a lot of other little stuff, and he's been talked about by a lot of people. One of the very interesting things about him now, he's taken this Overstock.com from nothing to being a major company and involved in a lot of other things where he's doing well. So you can't look at him and go, he's a dummy. But on the other hand, he can't string 2 words together. He's one of the worst interview guests I think you ever see on like all the major television networks, and really has a very hard time. And he's got very flighty mind and just jumps from this to this to this to this. So he's very incoherent in speaking. One of the interesting things out of that type of personality, which is not uncommon, is that those type of people, very interestingly, often tend to be excellent writers, but just can't speak to save their life. So I wouldn't know, of course, but just guessing, as CEO, most of what he did was in a written form to all of the people that worked in the company so that things could be presented in a coherent, cogent manner, which, like I said, speaking, he just can't do it. His mind keeps flitting from thing to thing to thing. So he himself, in these interviews, noted, and this is why I mention all of this, he himself noted that what he's going to do is put this all down, pen and paper, if you will. He's going to write it all out and post it on a site that he used to be involved with, apparently, and will then post all those things there. So as those come out, I think that's going to be far more detailed and revealing than what we're getting out of him verbally, just because he's so disjointed in the way that he presents this stuff. It's hard to string it all together. Now, back to the background in which this all appears to us, which is very interesting. Now, I've spoken a great deal about this, and I would say am pretty far out on the limb, if you will, on my observations of this whole thing. And I've talked about all roads lead back to John Brennan, how this was all something that was instituted long before President Trump became President Trump, before he won the election. And I've talked a great deal about how the FISA warrant fiasco was all part of this thing that started out during the campaign leading into the 2016 elections, and how all this began early, and that the only scenario that fits the circumstances is that this arose out of Hillary Clinton and her the loss of control of all these classified documents that ended up on WikiLeaks. Now, that led us back to Seth Rich, who was murdered downtown, who apparently was the source of these leaks to WikiLeaks and so on. So that's where kind of the origin of this was. And that timing has something that's been greatly disputed, of course, completely denied by mainstream media. They provide zero coverage of it. But now, just since I've covered that in so much detail before, I won't spend a lot of time on it now. But now zip back to the present moment here, where we have this Patrick Byrne who comes out, and some of the things that he said then are absolute, confirmation of all of these things I've been saying. I look at this as just it just every time we get a new bit of information or a new area to look at, all of it fits into this scenario exactly as I have laid it out over a long period of time now. And even what he says is that he was contacted back in 2015, which elections were in November of 2016. So this is well in anticipation. So there's this, the way it basically unfolds as he describes it is he meets this Butina, the Russian girl, and she's presented to him as some sort of first he meets her on his own. He's got apparently a low-level clearance, so he reports the foreign contact as you are required to do if you hold a clearance, and so it gets checked. Nobody really cares because it's not that sort of thing that rises to the top. It's not like she's the vice president of her company, of his company, or something like that that's doing government contracting, where something like that would start to raise counterintelligence eyebrows, if you will, and people would start to look at it. But so this is just some girl he met, has a romantic liaison with her for a period of 6 months or so, is what he claims. But all of this starts to float back up when it comes time for elections, and he gets contacted by the FBI, which he calls the Men in Black, which I'm not precisely sure why that would be the reference. There's the famous movies that are about space and things, which I don't really see the connection to the FBI out of that, but that's how he refers to them. So he's contacted by the FBI, and he says that he discovered this past summer, when all of this started to float to the top and people started to see more and more details, he figured it out that this was all being honchoed by Peter Strzok. Now, there were people sent by Peter Strzok to speak to Patrick Byrne, but it was all being, the immediate supervisor for it was Peter Strzok. Now, Peter Strzok, this is very unusual just in and of itself, which it's also kind of confirmation of what we've been hearing and what I've been saying. So keep in mind, Peter Strzok was head of the Counterintelligence Division for the FBI. The FBI split in two. Basically, you have the main leadership, the director of the FBI, a handful of people at that level, and then immediately following them, and very, very senior, and certainly talking to the director on a daily basis, you have the criminal division and you have the CI division, the counterintelligence division. Now, the criminal, of course, is much larger, but still, CI division is an important area out of the CIA. So you have this very senior guy personally running a case, directing the FBI agents to go do this and come back and tell me. And according to, again, Patrick Byrne, he didn't identify all of them, but certainly he gave all of the leadership at the FBI, including Comey, up to and including Comey at the FBI, and Andrew McCabe and the deputy and so on, through Peter Strzok. So he says that all these guys were involved, plus somebody else, and that somebody else was personally asking for his cooperation. Now, he doesn't say who it is. However, President Obama was raised as a possibility, and he said, don't assume that, don't assume that was Obama, which, again, makes perfect sense. In this scenario that I've laid out, he was specifically asked about John Brennan, who was at that time the director of the CIA. Now, I think that's the unmentioned name at this point, which he has said he gave to the Department of Justice in these interviews that he did in early and late April. He had 2 interviews, 7-hour period of time, goodly amount of discussion over these 2 different days. I think the 5th of April and the 30th of April were the days he mentioned. So he's passed this all to DOJ. Now, that unmentioned name, I'm speculating, was John Brennan. That would fit exactly the scenario of everything I'm discussing, and I'm hoping that when Mr. Byrne puts out the printed version of the written version of what he's talking about, that it'll reveal that name. But there is this unknown name that's still out there. And all of the leadership of the FBI, so other people, I wouldn't be surprised if it goes back to those same 3 names, which I've mentioned over and over and over, that always end up being at the center of this. And that is Jim Comey, James Clapper, who was the then Director of National Intelligence, which is in essence supposedly the head of all intelligence activities, and then John Brennan himself, who was, of course, the director of the CIA at the time. So I'm expecting those names to pop up. We'll see, but that's what would fit the circumstances and certainly the scenario that I'm arguing for up to this point. So he makes a number of interesting things. One is comments. One is that now he has these in April. Right on the heels of that, on May 13th, John Durham is appointed to investigate this as a special investigator. He's a prosecutor for DOJ, one that's well known to move in these sorts of cases and circles and be effective on it. So AG Barr, U.S. Attorney General Barr, appoints Durham to investigate this. Now, that timing is all correct. It's interesting. He had the interview on the 5th. The FBI would have looked at all of this, or DOJ rather, and looked at all this and said, holy moly, suddenly we're finding a lot of stuff. They have a bunch of follow-up questions and go back on the 30th, which that timing between the 5th and the 30th is about right. It gives them time to go follow up on everything they learned in the first interview, prepare all their questions for the second interview, and go back and take a look at it. Then again, moving forward, so the 30th of April, they then get all their follow-up questions in, and 13 May, Durham is appointed. And Burns claims that the appointment of Durham was exactly a result of his the information that he gave to DOJ. The timing all fits. That I tend to think that's exactly right. One of the other very interesting aspects out of this is this Russian girl, Butina, who is, I think, essentially a pawn out of all of this. Now, she's been convicted and sitting in jail. Now, most people, I don't think, focus on this, and it doesn't normally matter all that much, but the prosecutors are the ones that get to say where, if you're convicted of something, they set the jail or the institution in which you're jailed according to whatever the reaction is to the whole case. So they pick where you go to jail, basically. Butina was set to a place where she was essentially in isolation. And of course, that if you want to keep somebody's mouth shut, that's what you would want to do. Put them in jail in isolation, and nobody's going to hear what's going on. So again, right on the heels of all of this, U.S. Attorney General Barr takes a look at that through Durham, and she gets moved. And again, the timing of all of this is very interesting. So she's one of the people that can come in and confirm much of what Patrick Byrne has said. So I think that was all done, and her being moved to a different place where it's less controlled and not as harsh is something, now that Mueller is gone as far as prosecutor, special investigator. So that then falls back to DOJ to have that control, which they've moved her. So that very, very interesting. Now, I would say at this point, looking at all of it, there's 2 huge winners. One, of course, is the obvious one, which is Donald Trump. And because out of all of what we'll talk about all of this as we go further on, but all of this, again, is a reflection of what Trump has been saying from the very beginning. It's just more of evidence, and damning evidence, that what he's been saying about being spied on was true from the very beginning.
Gotta just cut in and mention one thing, though. First of all, 2 things. I think his referring to the FBI as Men in Black would be consistent with what, in his interview, he showed to be a kind of romanticization of intelligence services. Because I definitely, as I heard him talk, I had the sense that he's like that game show host that also claimed to have worked. You know what I'm talking about? He was the Gong Show
Chuck
guy,
Barris.
Chuck Barris. He's struck me as being somebody who had sufficiently romanticized intel services that being asked to participate in events gave him a sense of something special, and I just think he had that very romantic notion. So that would sort of explain why he referred to the FBI as Men in Black, I think. But the thing that was, I think, most surprising to most people was that he had said that this was an overall deep state / anti-state plot against both Hillary Clinton and Donald Trump. And what's interesting about that is I think the vast majority of people have seen this whole Russian collusion scandal as a plot by Hillary Clinton against Donald Trump. I think you've mentioned something about that before.
Yes, this is something we've talked about a great deal, and I will definitely come to all of that. And what you mentioned about his talking about the Men in Black and so on, there was an element I was going to come to later, but let me mention it now on his personality, and that was kind of why I raised this as a subject. From the perspective of intelligence, he's like the perfect guy to get cooperation with because he's rich enough. He doesn't want anything, so you don't have to like pay him. He's doing this, and I think this is genuine on his part. He says he does it because he's a loyal citizen of the United States, and he doesn't have a particular political axe to grind. But this is going to sound a little cruel, and it isn't really meant to be. But he's essentially this guy that's been successful. And so, of course, there's always kind of a yearning for something more, if you will, how to do more or succeed more or whatever as this type of person is, his personality type. So he's what I would call, at least, and it's often referred to this way in the business, is he's a wannabe. He loves the idea of spy stuff and being associated with it and any sort of intelligence thing, because it's this sort of closed world. It's skullduggery. It's one of the things you cannot buy with money. And so he's got that aspect to his personality where he wanted to be involved with it. And he'd mentioned it in a murder case that he was involved supporting law enforcement, and another case of something on Wall Street, apparently an insider trading type of situation that he helped with. And so this was a natural. And now these guys would have recognized that in him and recognized that there was a willingness on his part to participate. And the way that he would have come to their attention, and the point I would have made later on, is that this Butina was kind of what set this off. They saw a ready-made case. So they basically ignored Butina and his relationship with her all the way through to where he'd already, dumped her and moved on in life. And, they kind of raised it back up and were instructing them to start to use her again, deal with her again in order to make inroads. She was somebody that was trying to work on NRA, National Rifle Association type issues, and so she was involved with those guys in meeting senior Republican leadership and so on around the NRA. And I wouldn't be surprised if she was kind of sleeping her way around. I don't know that, but it's just kind of what has been discussed about her, is that was how she was increasing her access to these people by, fairly young girl and generally older guys. And so they would meet her at these events around the NRA. So she was somebody that was welcomed to these events by some of these gentlemen. Now, again, speculation. I don't know that, but that's kind of the rumor going around. Now, the other point about I was going to make about the big winners, Trump being one. The other that has been completely unassociated with this so far, that nobody has made this link yet, is General Flynn. Because see, this is how this is all laid out. This shows entrapment of Butina, because they ordered Patrick Byrne to have her go do all of this stuff. So is it government behest? But she didn't know that. Later then, under the Mueller investigation, they arrest her and put her in jail. And so being behind the scenes directed by the government to do it, for which you're later arrested, that's entrapment. All right, simple thing. I'm sure there's many lawyers who would explain it far better than I do, but that's the essence of it. Now, it also shows that how all of this was done and the methods behind it all and the motivations behind it all were purely political. And that's why Patrick Byrne was directed to do all this. There was nothing associated with any actual case. So that is going to be perfect for use by General Flynn in his case. And we've already had the judge in his case say, I've never put anybody in jail on a plea deal that wasn't guilty, and I'm not going to start now. The judge has already figured this out. So the Flynn team is going to be able to take this as it unfolds and use it in their own case to show evidence of how this whole thing was political and contrived. And the plea deal that was made is probably illegal because it wasn't based on actual cases or broken laws, if you will, that sort of thing. So it was all politically motivated. So I think you're going to see Flynn come out of this well. So in my opinion, those are the two big winners. Now, to one of the points that you were making here about how so again, we're moving forward again in time. And so what Patrick Byrne has said is that he was instructed, now he's to rekindle the relationship with Butina, and he's going to use, as a very wealthy man and donor, his contacts to ingratiate her. So now, the way that the FBI, according to Byrne, told him to, their take on Butina is that she's this idealistic young lady who wants to help peace in the world, sort of thing. Now, those are my words, but that's essentially the essence of what they're doing. Now, one of the things that I've said all along about this whole case is how childish it is. And one of the things now, if it's like anything else, if you're, been doing something for 30 or 40 years, I mean, you just know how the whole thing works and you become an expert on it. And so you look at somebody who's like just starting out the first day, it doesn't matter the skill set. Somebody who's just starting, the 30 or 40-year veteran, will take a look at what they do and go, good God, this guy has so much to learn. You can tell, you just look at it and you know what's right, what's wrong, why they're making the mistakes they make, and so on. And this is a perfect example of what I've always said. This intelligence whole program, I think, the mastermind was John Brennan. And if you look at these instructions like, oh, this girl is an idealistic young thing who wants to have peace in the world, that's a cover story. So that's what the FBI presented to Patrick Byrne. Now, Patrick Byrne, non-professional, he does other stuff. He doesn't know the difference. But you get a professional look at it and you go, oh, my God, what, an infantile, childish cover story that they gave for Butina to Patrick Byrne. And it just fits this whole thing that I see. Again, for me now personally, that's more confirmation of what I've been saying. Because as director of the CIA, John Brennan was never up to the task. He was, basically washed out of the agency early on, had no operational experience or training to speak of. So he doesn't know. And so I look at it as an experienced guy, what John Brennan did, how he became director of the CIA. Oh, my God. And I look at that and go, what a juvenile thing. Okay, well, that fits exactly the pattern I've seen out of all of this stuff. I mean, it was so amateurish because of the people you put in charge. One point on that, I know it's an aside, so forgive me, but it's what you see out of the left worldwide, not just by the liberals here in the United States, but by socialists and communists everywhere in the world. Who they promote up is not the person who has the best skill set to match the need. That's on the conservative side. You see they tend to hire somebody who's really good. Whoever's in charge of economics is a guy with an economic background who's got years of experience and is an expert on it. Who the left moves into that position is somebody that's politically reliable. That is always the way that the leftist philosophy operates. And so these people that we've seen moved up to the CIA, DNI, FBI intelligence in particular, but FBI in general, DOJ, all of them are those. They're leftists. And so they're promoted up based on their political reliability and loyalty, not on their skills. And so out of that, then we see this juvenile treatment of this case. They would have, if it had been a senior guy that worked for me that started saying, let's do all this stuff, I'd have sent him off to Timbuktu and, gotten rid of him because he just clearly doesn't know what he's doing and needs more experience. So, by the way, that entrapment, I think we're going to see that entrapment defense used by Butina at her defense team as well. And so I think you're going to see some of these people walk pretty quick. Flynn, Butina, all of these cases are going to start to fall apart because now they're under scrutiny. One of the things I've said all along, this whole thing was started way back in at least 2015, and maybe a little before, just depending on what they were up to at the time. But it was started back in 2015 as a result of Hillary Clinton's problems, and so they were just looking for targets to go after, which is precisely again what Patrick Byrne says, that he was directed. One, okay, fine, Hillary Clinton, well, let me come back to that, but Ted Cruz and Marco Rubio and Donald Trump. Now, at the time, if you look back, who were the leading candidates for the Republican nomination that had a good chance of winning? And I think those three sum it up. And so they began to drop off. It began to be clear that Trump was indeed going to be the candidate. And you saw the focus start to tighten down to only Donald Trump with the use of subpoena at the orders of the FBI through Patrick Byrne. So just all fits precisely. Now, his comment on targeting of Hillary Clinton, the targeting, by the way, is introducing Butina into the Hillary crowd, just like he could do because of being a donor, wealthy guy. He would meet the people in these campaigns that are running it, because you always want to invite rich people because you need money, and they are the ones that have the money. So I would put that as cover for action. I mean, that would be the term I would use for it. They would instruct him to, take a look at Hillary too, and we want to see who's susceptible or whatever. We're trying to figure this whole thing out. And that quickly got by the wayside too, because they were never interested in Hillary Clinton. They only said that, in my opinion, to Patrick Byrne, as I said, like cover for action. Make it look like it's some sort of even-handed thing. We're looking at all of these people and then slowly focus down to what your real target is, which is what you've been after all along. And that, of course, was going to be the Republican candidate, which was clearly Donald Trump.
That makes perfect sense.
Yeah,
but
everything fits.
I want to put one question to you, though. Definitely it would be a good thing if Flynn and other victims of this plot were to walk. But I think the most significant thing in terms of the future of American constitutional law is if the people who actually committed these actions, that set these plots in motion, are brought to justice, and there's a transparent transparent legal process against them. What do you think of the chances of that at any time soon?
That is the million-dollar question. That is absolutely the central question to this. It's something you and I have touched on a number of times. My opinion is, and it will be proven in time whether I'm right or wrong on this, but my opinion is that A.G. Barr has the wherewithal, the huevos, if you will, to go after this. And I think by the appointment of John Durham, who also is the type of guy that's not afraid to move these things forward, by the expansion of the Durham investigation, which now, if all of this can be taken in, I think we can mostly take this at face value. So let's do for discussion here. So Patrick Byrne goes in, lays all this out. DOJ takes a few weeks to investigate it and goes, holy crap, this makes sense. Put together another list of questions, go back, get a whole bunch more stuff, hand it all over to John Durham. They're expecting this to be wrapped up, if you recall, in, like, they were talking about June. He starts in mid-May, which, if it were just this case like this in a nutshell that they could figure the whole thing out, that would have been enough time for them to put something together and come to a conclusion, recommend the prosecution of somebody. But instead, what happened is they rented more office space, hired more lawyers, because every time they start digging in, they find more and more and more and more and more. So that means they didn't define it down to something where they get one person in trouble and then, wash their hands of it. So they've expanded, continued to look, and they're going after this stuff. So my opinion is they're going to indict a bunch of these people. And I think all of the people that we've been talking about, I think Peter Strzok, who's filed a countersuit, interestingly enough, for wrongful dismissal, I think I think in his case he's looking at it as a good offense is the best defense. But
I can't see a downside for him. I mean, yeah. At this point, there's simply, I can't see a downside. Either he wins or he stays where he is. So
Yep.
there's no loss. It's actually a straightforward game theory, if situation for
Agreed.
him. If he doesn't act, or if he does take this chance, there's just simply no increased loss if it doesn't work.
Yes. And it might create some smoke and some doubt and so on, which if he ever goes to trial, I mean, that might be of value to him, because any doubt that you can create in a jury's mind, if he were ever actually go to trial, would be all to the good from his perspective. So I think you're going to see.
Let's hope he gets the OJ jury.
Well, yeah, we'll see how all of that plays out. Now, I personally would be a little surprised to see any of this go to trial, except for maybe just the very top echelons, which, again, now my opinion, all this needs to be played out, but I think what they'll do is you'll see Strzok. I think the people underneath Strzok, based on what Patrick Byrne has said, will testify against him. And because they all see this as just all turning to crap. So I think those guys, they don't really have a dog in the fight anyway. So why should they go down in flames for Peter Strzok? So I think they'll all testify against him and just say, yeah, this is what he ordered me to do. This is what he said. That's what I did. And, that is a good legal defense. He was the division chief. He talks to the director. Who's I to say no? So that I think would be very reasonable. And now I'm telling you everything I know. I think that's precisely what will happen, and I wouldn't be surprised if those guys have already been talked to. So as this plays forward, I think we'll see these guys go to jail. I think in plea bargain deals, but I think it's going to stop short of the White House. I don't think anybody wants to go after Obama. And I think Obama probably, this could not have been done without his knowing. But I think that assumption or that belief isn't the same thing as trying to go prosecute him or, put him in jail for things. So, and even if it was, I've said this before, even if he's guilty and found guilty, which there would be a certain utility in that, I wouldn't want to see a former president of the United States actually go to jail. So I would hope Trump would pardon him if that were the case. But at any rate, that's wild speculation at this point. But it's not wild speculation to think that this will go as high as John Brennan, James Clapper, and James Comey. I think that's going to be the center of this, in association with the Hillary Clinton campaign and people. So there's already been more news coming out about how these documents were destroyed, how the copies of the classified information was made, the bargains that were made with DOJ and the people in the Hillary Clinton campaign they weren't in her campaign, but they were also the people that worked for her at the State Department, which is where these documents, the origin of these documents was. So there's a big bunch of documents that just came out, made public, that was from FOIA requests made. So this is all coming together. All the pieces fit. It all looks bad. Now, one final point I wanted to make on all of this, and then we'll just kind of sum it up and see if there's anything else you want to talk about this. But the defense was to go after all of this stuff. What was kind of explained to Patrick Byrne, the logic that's on paper as to why this was done. And again, let me repeat, all of this was done with the understanding Hillary Clinton was going to be president. So that's why there's so much paper trail in all of this. That's because the legal system requires it. You got to have a good paper trail of the whole investigation so you can go after these people and get them in legal trouble, legal jeopardy, if not in jail. So that's biting them in the rear end now, because all of these paper trails exist as to what they were doing. So now on paper, the way they describe this is a Russian national. Now we're talking about like Butina and what the excuse was as to why they went after her, why this then becomes a CI threat. And so they're saying that she's this Russian national who's promoting Russian interests that are not necessarily in alignment with U.S. national interests. And so therefore, she is an agent of a foreign power. Her status then as an agent of a foreign power means that the U.S. intelligence community is fully able to surveil her or do whatever they want to do to go after her to see what she's doing. Now, that basically is, it's lawyer speak. It's doing a lot of dancing and moving around. It's not a straightforward thing. It's not, I would say it's actually just pretty much all BS the way this is, because number of things. As a foreign agent, as an agent of a foreign power, Butina never worked for the Russian government. Nobody ever claimed she worked for the Russian government. She always claimed that she worked for rich Russians, the oligarchs, and was looking for ways to establish contacts with essentially U.S. oligarchs for some sort of cooperation in the business realm.
Basically, just a headhunter, the way somebody
Yes.
who works looking for excellent hirees,
Correct.
construction contractors, whatever have you.
Exactly. And that's absolutely normal. Big businesses reach out to each other all over the world. And there are people that do that. And I think headhunter is a very apt description. That does not make that person the agent of a foreign power, because, nobody's claiming that she worked for Russian SVR, the intelligence arm of the Russian government. Nobody claims that that's what took place, and that she, was trying to reach out to Trump campaign employees to introduce them to a Russian intelligence SVR officer so he can recruit them to report on later the Trump administration within the government. So, see, nobody says any of that happened. That would be an agent of foreign power. That would be somebody who's working for a foreign power. So, all of this, the way it's all manipulated and done, and that phrase that I kind of mentioned to you, that's a typical standard thing that's used if you are indeed looking at somebody that's an agent of a foreign power. And that allows you to use the resources of the U.S. government to take a look at them, see what they're up to, see if they are indeed somebody who's working for Russian intelligence. But that doesn't appear at all to be the case for this girl. Now, she's gotten in a lot of trouble on this stuff. But again, it looks like a lot of it was things that she was directed to do by the FBI via Patrick Byrne. Again, entrapment. So it's just the whole thing. Like I said, because they were using resources to look at her, you have to have a case. To open a case, you have to have a reason to open a case. For FBI, CIA is parallel, it's similar. But that's just how it works in all of law enforcement. So you have to have a reason. So they come up with this goofball reason that really doesn't stand up to a lot of scrutiny, but it stamps the paper. And so, again, all of this was done under the belief that the standard was going to be very loose in looking at them, because Hillary Clinton was going to be president and it would never really get scrutinized. And I think that's the problem. And I think we've seen that come out of the mouth of Attorney General Barr. He has said, I went to the FBI asking questions and they didn't have answers for me. Well, what's that mean? And okay, then I'm going to keep turning the pages until I find the answers I want in here. And he comes across this Patrick Byrne and looks at it and goes, this is all bad news, guys. We're gonna dig into this, and he has been. So again, that's my prediction. I think you're going to start to see everyone below Peter Strzok is going to turn on him immediately, because he looks like again, personal opinion, all of that. I don't know, never met the man, and fully intend never to meet him, but he looks like an a-hole. So, just the way he talks and stuff, I don't think he's well liked. I don't think he's well respected. Certainly the way he handled his cases are, like I said, juvenile. Underneath him, there'd be experienced people that would have taken a look at this guy and go, what a frickin' douche. I think everybody will turn on him in a heartbeat. And so, again, if this...
he certainly seems to have a little of the old narcissistic personality disorder.
Yes, he does.
Based on the few exchanges I saw between him and Lisa Page, is that her name?
Yes.
There was a bit of the narcissist there.
No question. And like I said, I would be stunned to learn that he was this loved and respected character within the FBI. So, like I said, I think they'll all turn. So I think you can just take a look at Peter Strzok and below and say they're all going to testify to this. Peter Strzok meets the threshold of he would be an actual target, and above up to Clapper, Comey, and Brennan. So I think that's the block of people we're going to see be prosecuted out of all of this. And I think that encompasses it. I think it will stop there. I don't know, but I don't think any of them would go, yeah, okay, I'll give you Obama to give me a break. And I don't think they would something again we've talked about, but immediately on the heels, the day after the Mueller investigation was ended and the report turned in and all, AG Barr reinstituted the federal offenses, the death penalty. Again, I'm not a fond guy. I don't have a fondness for coincidence. So I look at this as causal, not coincidence. And I think he took a look at everything that was going on, wanted the death penalty back on the table. I think it'd go to a guy like Peter Strzok. Again, my reading of Peter Strzok, again, never met him and all that, but I see the same things you see, that, he really looks like like I say, kind of a douche. So forgive me for my bad language, but a guy like that is, if you sit in front of him and say, look, we got a ton of evidence against you, you're in deep trouble, my friend. And by the way, death penalty is on the table in front of you because this all looks like treason. We're going after you for treason. So you want to deal or you want to go to trial and risk death penalty? And a guy like that, I don't think he could last, 30 seconds without breaking down in tears and telling him everything he knows. So I think, he'll end up in jail out of the deal, but he'll get his 20 or 30 years, whatever it would be, in order that he testify against the next guys up, which I think on all of his dealings, which is completely logical, that he would have dealt directly with James Comey. And we know that James Comey and Clapper and Brennan were all good buds, and apparently we're all talking about this. There's been a lot of evidence to that effect that has come out also from FOIA requests, which is the source of that email that we saw where Brennan is telling Comey that the Steele dossier has to be included as a document because it's the Crown document for this whole thing. So again, just to summarize it, all of this fits together beautifully. If you look at it from this scenario that I've been arguing for quite a little while now, that this began with the leaked documents from Hillary Clinton, classified documents, that she needed to try and fix this problem somehow, turned to these guys who were all loyal Democratic lieutenants, and this was the solution they came up with. And these guys, not really truly, they're being loyal party apparatchiks, but not really being professionals truly, in the sense that I mean it in the intelligence world in particular, maybe a little more in the law enforcement, but even then there's a lot of questions about their judgment and things they did. But they were basically amateurs in this, and it just shows. And that's part of why this whole thing is just turning to CRAP. It's because, you had the C team in there making all the major decisions and no adult in the room, which is interesting because that's what they always claim is the problem with Donald Trump. And yet, they're the ones guilty of it all the time, this lack of judgment and how to move forward and the desperation and stuff. They should have, on the Republican side, if you'd looked at all the nonsense and poor judgment and disastrous decisions that were made by Hillary Clinton, the Republican Party would have thrown her under the bus. And by the way, I'm no big proponent of the Republican Party particularly. I'm more a conservative Christian sort of guy than a Republican Party sort of guy, which I'm sure this will get me in trouble later, but it's the truth, but even the Republican Party would have thrown Hillary Clinton under the bus 20 years ago because of all the fiascos she's involved with and questionable judgment and self-serving nature of this lady, the stuff that she and her husband have done. I'm surprised she survived this long, but, she and her husband, both lawyers, knew the system, were well connected, and it leads us to where we are today, which, if this does not get prosecuted by AG Barr, I just don't know what will happen. It would be a very dangerous thing to see move forward if AG Barr is not up to the task that appears to be in front of him. I believe he is. I personally have faith in him. I don't know him personally, but I think it's moving forward that way. So I have faith in him until I see something go, south.